$800 million. That is how much cash QVC moved up to its holding companies around December 2022, while the television shopping empire that earned it was already dying. Less than 4 years later, in April 2026, the parent of QVC and HSN filed for bankruptcy, $6.6 billion in debt, stacked on the one company that employed all 15,800 workers, while the cash had spent more than a decade flowing the other way. Upward, out, gone. Here is the part nobody wants you to notice. The company was forced by the bankruptcy court itself to appoint independent investigators and let them add up exactly how much had been drained out of it over the years. What they found, and what the plan then did with it, is why a group of shareholders filed a 900-page objection, calling the outcome a complete capitulation. We will get to that number and to who walked away rich before the lights went out, because this is not the story of a company killed by TikTok. This is the story of a company that was hollowed out by design, and the receipt has names on it. But to understand how $6.6 billion in debt ended up on the wrong company, you first have to understand what was actually being drained. In June 1986, a man named Joseph Seckel signed a small company on the air in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and called it QVC, Quality, Value, Convenience. 4 years earlier, on a cable channel out of Florida, the home shopping network had already proven the idea worked. The pitch was deceptively simple. Point a camera at a product, put a clock on the screen, and let a host talk to America one item at a time. It turned cable television into an impulse buying machine on a national scale. And it was enormous. At its peak, QVC and HSN together pulled in around $13.5 billion a year. The company ran around-the-clock broadcasts, 100 on-air hosts, vast distribution centers, and at its high point employed roughly 27,000 people. This was not a gimmick. For 2 generations of Americans, this was where you shopped before the internet learned how. It was, in every sense that matters, an institution. If you grew up in America before the smartphone, you knew the rhythm of it. The host holding a piece of jewelry up to the light. The little counter ticking down the units remaining. The phone number on the screen and the quiet promise that an operator was standing by. Behind that calm picture sat something staggering. Warehouses the size of small towns, call centers humming through the night, and a logistics operation that could put a product in front of millions of people and have it on their doorstep days later. People built careers there. Whole Pennsylvania counties were anchored by it. That is what was on the table. Keep it in mind, because the tragedy here is not that the institution faded, it is what was deliberately done to it on the way down. So hold that number in your head, 27,000 people, $13.5 billion a year, because by the time this company filed for bankruptcy, more than 11,000 of those jobs were already gone. The decline did not start in the bankruptcy court. It started the moment someone decided this machine was less a business to be grown than a source of cash to be moved. And the man who designed that machine had a nickname on Wall Street. They called him the Cable Cowboy. In 2003, Liberty Media, the conglomerate controlled by the legendary dealmaker John Malone, paid $7.9 billion to take full control of QVC. Malone did not build QVC. He acquired it, and then he did what he was famous for. He engineered the structure around it. Now, this is the part that sounds boring and is actually the entire crime. So stay with me, because everything later depends on it. Over the following years, QVC was wrapped inside a stack of holding companies, one sitting on top of another. On top of another, at the very bottom, sat the operating company. That is the part that actually does things, runs the broadcasts, employs the people, ships the products, and critically, that is the part that carried the debt. Above it sat a chain of parent entities whose main function was to receive money from the bottom and pass it further up. Picture a building where the people doing all the work are in the basement, holding all the bills, and every floor above them exists mostly to collect the rent. That is the architecture. And once it was built, it quietly decided who would win and who would lose long before any single dollar actually moved. Then came the deals. In 2015, the company bought a flash sale website called Zulily for $2.4 billion. Remember that one, it comes back, and it comes back ugly. In 2017, it acquired the rest of HSN in a stock deal worth about $2.1 billion, folding its oldest rival into the empire and, within a year, rebranding the whole thing Curate. On paper, it was the largest player in an entire category of retail. And right at that moment of maximum size, with cord cutting just beginning to bite into the audience, the structure stopped being about growth and started being about extraction. Because here is what began to flow out of the basement. Start in September 2020. The company issued around $1.3 billion of preferred stock and handed it to shareholders as a special dividend. That single move created an obligation to pay roughly $25 million every quarter to the holders of that preferred stock. Over the next several years, those payments added up to about $450 million, and they were funded substantially by the cash of the operating company at the bottom. Then, in December 2020, an intercompany promissory note was created, $1.875 billion that an intermediate holding company owed back down to the operating company. Follow what happens to that. In the final bankruptcy plan, the operating company's claim on roughly $1.74 billion of that note recovers nothing. Zero. The basement lent the upper floors nearly $2 billion, and the upper floors simply did not pay it back. Then, around December 2022, the moment we opened on, the operating company sent $800 million up the chain in what the court documents call a cash management distribution. Not a dividend in the legal sense, a structured transfer of cash upward at a time when the business was still recovering from a catastrophic warehouse fire and bleeding viewers to streaming. And it kept going. There were tax-sharing payments where the operating company paid the parent's tax bills, and the company's own investigators concluded those payments ran above the actual liability by somewhere between $691 million and $1.3 billion. There were sale-leasebacks. In 2022, the company sold its own headquarters, its studios, and warehouses, around $625 million of real estate, and then started paying rent to the new owners to keep working in its own buildings. Added up, and a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with consumer behavior. Cash left the operating company through dividends, through an unpaid note, through tax payments, through its own real estate, every legal channel the structure allowed. And all of it landed on the floors above the basement, while the $6.6 billion of debt stayed exactly where it had always been, at the bottom, on the company with the workers. And in a few minutes, we will get to what the executives who oversaw all this decided to do for themselves, 8 months before the company finally filed. The decision is not complicated, but the number is not subtle. So when people tell you QVC died because shoppers moved to their phones, that is the half of the story you were supposed to accept. Here is the other half. Even a healthy business can be killed if you take enough cash out of it fast enough. A company can be profitable on the surface and insolvent underneath if the cash that should be paying down its debt is being routed somewhere else entirely. That is not a market force. That is a choice made by people, again and again, over a decade. And if you think the extraction was the worst of it, it wasn't. Because the same years that the cash was flowing up are the years the company made the two decisions that should have been its salvation and turned them instead into its epitaph. Return to Zulily, bought in 2015 for $2.4 billion as the company's big bet on flash sale e-commerce. Exactly the kind of online future it needed. In May 2023, it was sold. For $25 million. There was a contingent payout of up to $375 million attached to the deal. The kind of number that sounds like a cushion. It never materialized. Zulily collapsed into its own bankruptcy months later. So the real exit was $25 million on a $2.4 billion purchase. That is 99% of the money. Gone. The single worst capital decision in the company's history, and it vaporized the very online business that might have saved the rest. And the operational wounds were just as brutal. In December 2021, a fire tore through the company's distribution center in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, destroying most of a 1.5 million square foot hub, killing a worker, and erasing hundreds of millions in revenue. The company had also invented live on-air shopping decades before TikTok turned it into a $15 billion phenomenon, and then watched a new generation of platforms capture the category it created, while it was too loaded with debt to chase it. So by 2025, the revenue that once peaked at $13.5 billion had fallen to $9.23 billion. Free cash flow had turned negative. Customers were walking. And it was here, at the company's most desperate hour, that the most telling decision of all was made. In August 2025, 8 months before the bankruptcy filing, the company paid 5 of its top executives $31 million in special bonuses. The chief executive alone took $15.75 million, more than double what the company had paid him in total the entire year before. The official rationale was that they were giving up future equity awards. Equity that, a few months later, would be canceled in bankruptcy for nothing anyway. So the executives traded paper that was about to become worthless for $31 million in cash that was very real, 8 months before the filing, while the company was quietly building its own bankruptcy case. Add it all up, the $800 million moved upward, the $1.8 billion that was never repaid. The $2.4 billion turned into $25 million. The $31 million handed to 5 people 8 months before the doors closed. There is a number at the end of that list, and the company's own court-appointed investigators were forced to put it in writing. What that number was and what the plan then offered in exchange, and whether anyone had the power to say no, is where this ends. On April 16, 2026, QVC Group filed for Chapter 11 in the Southern District of Texas. The plan cut that $6.6 billion of debt down to about $1.3 billion. To their credit, the company pledged no layoffs in the filing itself. But remember, 11,000 jobs had already disappeared in the years before. Here is the moment the whole story turns on. The bankruptcy forced the company to appoint independent directors and have them investigate the company's own past, to add up exactly how much value had been pulled out of the operating company and into the parents. And this was not an internal whitewash. These were independent directors. The bankruptcy process required them to seat, working with outside forensic accountants from the restructuring firm Alex Partners, an arm's-length investigation. Their answer: the claims against the parent entities were worth somewhere between $1 billion and $3 billion. $1 to $3 billion that arguably belonged back down in the basement, with the creditors and the workers. And the plan settled those claims for $400 million. Preferred shareholders filed an 862-page objection calling it, in effect, a total capitulation. But the settlement held, so let us read the receipt out loud. Who got rich? The structure built by Liberty Media and John Malone moved cash upward for more than a decade, and Malone, separately, was named in a shareholder lawsuit alleging a sham stock transaction worth around $52 million. He admitted no wrongdoing, and the case settled in 2024. The preferred shareholders collected roughly $450 million in dividends out of the operating company's cash. The real estate buyer purchased the company's own buildings and now collects rent on them forever. And 5 executives split $31 million in bonuses, 8 months before the doors were nailed shut. And who paid? The 15,800 employees who carried the company on their backs, the warehouse workers, the call center staff, the people in those Pennsylvania towns who thought a company this big could never really fall, the vendors who shipped product on credit and joined a line of creditors who will recover cents on the dollar, the customers who built 2 generations of loyalty into a brand that was quietly being emptied out behind the camera. They are the ones who absorbed the loss, because by the time the bankruptcy made it official, the people who could have stopped it were already gone and already paid. That is the anatomy of this collapse, not a story about cord cutting. A story about a building where the basement held all the debt, the upper floors collected all the cash, and when the math finally broke, it was the basement that filed for bankruptcy. QVC did not simply lose to the future. It was bankrupt long before it ever admitted it, because the people who designed the machine made sure that whatever happened to the company, they would not be the ones left holding the bill.